So just bring us up to date.
Hello to you. I'm currently at the Jomo Kenyatta International Airport, where the airport's strike or the standoff that was being witnessed for the past 2 days has come to an end after yesterday the Employment and Labor Relations Court ordered the pilots to resume back to work at 6 a.m. today morning. And from what we've gathered so far, what we've seen so far, the pilots are back to work. The flights have taken off. The standoff that was here yesterday and the past few days where the passengers were standing, right now there's no that crowd anymore. I don't know if you can be able to see at the moment, like yesterday, and the previous day here at the Terminal 1A, where we have international departures, it was full of people, but right now it's quite empty. That means the standoff is off. The passengers have been able to move or be able to fly to their destinations, and what we have is just arrivals, so those who are coming in the morning and those who are waiting for their flights to take off maybe around 12 or 1 p.m. So far the standoff is off completely. What we've gathered so far, the airport operations are back to normal, according to the what CALPA said yesterday, because they ordered their members to come back to work, and also requested the KQ management not to victimize the pilots who took part in the industrial actions. So far the standoff is off. We are hoping to talk to more people who are traveling. We're hoping to engage more people after this, just to hear what if they're still having any challenges or not. But what we've gathered so far from the Jomo Kenyatta International Airport is the operations are back to normal. The air pilots are back to work, and those who had missed their flights have been able to fly, and there are those who are still waiting to fly back. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Beldin, there, giving us an update on the situation at Jomo Kenyatta International Airport. We'll definitely be following up on this story. All right, now to our discussion today, and I have with me John Masharia, who is the country manager, Agra, and we are going to be discussing about the agri-SME sector in Kenya. And first of all, when we look at this sector, where are we in terms of even just embracing agriculture?
Thank you very much, Kelvin, for having me here, and thank you for the conversation. I think if you understand that demand for food will not abate. Right now, we are around 50 million Kenyans. In the next, our population growth is about 1 million people per year. So by 2030, we anticipate will be 10 million more people, and those are 10 million more mouths to feed. So the space for agribusiness is the space to be at, because that is where the next billionaires of this country will be making their money. And we are trying to get to work together with government and other partners to ensure that we have the right tools and the right approaches that come to bear for small SMEs that are starting up, and those that are already in the ecosystem and that are willing to grow. At the moment, the contribution of the agricultural value add in the country is still quite low, and this is symptomatic to the fact that we need to have better structured markets, we need to have better structured access to finance, but we also need to have a cadre of employees who are willing to come to bear for the agricultural sector.
All right, and now moving on and also looking at the high cost of living. Right now, inflation is almost 9.2%. And when we look at this, and an agri-SME, a small business that is dealing with agriculture and also just focusing on agriculture, how does someone manage to stay afloat?
So SMEs, like all over the world, they are the bedrock of innovation. And I think with the high cost of living that we have COVID, we have almost triple pandemics or shocks that are affecting Kenya and quite a number of the African countries. But even in the same space, we've seen SMEs that are innovating. Think of Twiga Foods, that is actually revolutionizing how you connect smallholder farmers with retailers in the urban market. Think about DigiFarms, that has also registered close to 1 million smallholder farmers and is also able to provide them with inputs for them to be able to grow. Think about Global, that you can actually go to your app and actually order for food, from wherever it will get delivered. So I think what I'm saying is that there's an increased need for product innovation as well as operational innovation, so that you're able to manage your own production cost vis-a-vis the cost of the end product to a consumer. So taking up digitization is one of the ways that will actually help you do this. And I think the companies that I've mentioned are actually doing a good job at doing that. But the second thing is also being able to access some of the credit guarantee facilities that the government has put in place, because they are able to provide lending that is at affordable rates than those that are commercially out there.
All right. And also, when we look at, right now we have COP-27 going on in Egypt, and one of the key major topics of discussion is climate change. All right. Now, when you look at climate change, what can farmers and agri-SMEs really expect from this conference?
I think the first thing is to articulate and understand the magnitude of the climate change that we're talking about. I think if you look at the latest report, I think during COP27 from the World Meteorological Organization, it actually says the last 8 years have been the hottest in the globe historically, right? So the call to actually maintain, temperatures at anywhere between 1.5 degrees centigrade to 2 is really a must. It's not a choice that we have. The climate is getting hotter and hotter. This morning I was looking at FAO predictions for Kenya over the last 20 years, and this really is the hottest Kenya has been, right, over the years. From an Africa GDP perspective, I think the chair of the AU did mention that Africa has lost 10% of its GDP just because of climate.
Yes.
Right? So the call for us to be able to mitigate, for us to be able to help people in adoption, to adapt, and for us to also be able to channel investments towards climate is also an imperative that we must take up. And to do this, we need to help smallholder farmers be able to better take up, climate smart technologies, regenerative agriculture, things that to do with agroecology, technologies and approaches that better keep water in the soil and better help manage, biodiversity and things like that. I mean, I think in the last week we saw almost 200 elephants are dead. Imagine that agroecological and ecosystem asset that has just, gotten off the planet because of climate change. But more critically, when you talk about climate financing, I think the goal is to try and mobilize about $100 billion per year in climate financing. And I think therein lies the opportunity. But beyond that, it's also to understand that the COP is a platform to have the right conversation with governments, the right conversation with policymakers, and also catalyze private sector to be able to make investments towards, mitigating climate change, helping smallholder farmers adapt to climate change, but also talk about the issues of loss and damage, because the people who are actually suffering the most from climate change have the least to do, or are the least contributors towards climate change.
Very well said. And when we look at also food security in terms of trying to conserve the environment, because a lot of farm produce is wasted at the end of a harvest period. You find that not everything that has been harvested, of course, will be taken to the market. And if it's taken to the market, it gets wasted. So how do we make sure that at least going forward, we try and save on this farm produce for businesses?
So, Kelvin, post-harvest losses is basically a symptom of a bigger problem. And the problem often is a dysfunctional market system that is not linking, consumers and agribusinesses and farmers more appropriately, right? And we've had investments by the Rockefeller Foundation, BMGF, in quite a number of African countries, the World Bank, IFAD, who are actually out there setting up infrastructure to ensure that, food or excess food from farms is actually able to go into a processing facility that basically elongates the shelf life of that particular commodity. So I think around the mango area here, we had quite a number of mango dryers and things like that. We've had, pick bags and quite a number of other technologies that are out there. But really, the best form of managing post-harvest losses is agro-processing. Process it into another commodity that can actually extend its shelf life from 2 weeks to 3 months, to 6 months, to 12 months, and thereby you give it, you smooth out the seasonality of consumption and ensure that that food actually gets to the table. But even before we think about post-harvest loss, I think as Agra, what you're saying, the conversation needs to be about sustainable farming systems. Sustainable because climate change is our existential threat. Not having water right now, if you go to Isiolo and Samburu, no farmer is going to tell you that, look, I have issues with my soil. Everyone is saying I have issues with water. So helping people better manage the water in soil, but also harvest more water with the little available rain that is there is vitally important. I think right now, based on FAO statistics, we are probably going into a fourth season of below average rains. And we need to understand the implication of that in terms of food availability and food security for this country.
All right, and also speaking on this and looking at the conference that we have in Egypt, what impact do we expect to see in terms of working towards improving farming methods, in terms of just coming up with better yields for the farmers in order for them to sustain themselves and also to sustain the agri-SME sector in Kenya?
I think there's this particular COP is very hopeful. For me, for one, it's an African COP, as you're saying it, because it's not only in the African continent,
yes,
but it's also happening at a time where sub-Saharan Africa is actually going through the brunt of climate change. So it's very obvious for people to see. I think His Excellency William Ruto did mention in his opening remarks that he had just come from flagging off food aid for 4.5 million Kenyans who need emergency food aid. But more so, it's because this COP is also talking about food at the center of everything. Climate change is affecting food. So this, for me, is a session where we expect bold statements like we're seeing His Excellency making around carbon credits, around climate financing, but it's also a conference where African governments should catalyze action as opposed to, just waiting for other nations to provide money. It is, can we do the little we can with the money that we have? I was very pleased to see the young lady who had planted 10,000 trees and had a tree nursery of another 30,000 trees. Yes. Those are the actions we need to take. It's the simple actions that we take that will actually make the big difference that we want to see.
All right, now, drought. It has been a topic of discussion. It's a national disaster. And we've seen areas really going through this, really being hit by this. So now, going forward, an agri-SME that is really in such a region, how do they stay afloat? How do they make sure that at least at the end of the day they have something?
And that's a tough question, Kevin, and you don't have to tell me about the ravages of drought. We have projects in Isiolo and Samburu, we have projects in Makueni and Tharaka Nithi, and it's terribly dry. I have walked into farms that have not had rain for the last, 3 or 4 seasons. Actually, there's a farm that I'll probably be visiting, and the last rain season they had was not more than 20 days in a whole year. And that has implications of agribusinesses that serve those kinds of farmers.
Yes.
It's to understand that if there's no rain, then there's no agro-dealer who can provide inputs. There's no transporter who can take anything to that farm, in and out of that farm. And that then means that, the fact that incomes are being constrained by drought, then businesses that businesses whose viability depend on that farm are also constrained. So I think what we are urging government is also to be able to create more credit guarantee facilities that are able to help these particular businesses remain afloat. Most need to pay their loans. Most needs to be able to serve the farmers as much as things are thick there. I think there are options to do with blended financing that can come in from development partners. There are issues to do with digital financing that can also be able to to help them up, but also linking those farmers with digital technologies that can help or those agribusinesses that can help serve other communities where where demand is more efficient. There are issues to do with asset financing that can come to bear for these kind of institutions.
All right, even as we finish and looking at a new government and with this all new strategies of doing things, and when we look at agriculture going forward, what needs to be done? What are some of the policies that can be improved or even put in place in order to support agri-SMEs and also businesses that depend on agriculture?
So first of all is to congratulate His Excellency and also Honorable Bidhika Linturi, who's now the CS for Agriculture. The second thing to say is that we have a 10-year agricultural strategy, the agriculture sector transformation and growth strategy that is actually, that laid a foundation for the things that we need to do so that we are food secure in the next 10 years. And therein, you also find things to do with climate change, early warning systems, to warn us about pests and diseases and things like that. There's a whole section on digital prioritizing agriculture to drive efficiency, but there are also policy reforms that are in there that are important to ensure that we are providing the right tone of language to private sector to be able to invest. And I would also like to congratulate His Excellency because of providing subsidy at a time where, you know, there is drought on one side, but there is also need to reduce the cost of inputs. But also what we are urging is that subsidies are not just about fertilizer. You also need to add seeds, pesticides, and post-harvest technology so that you're providing a whole suite of services to smallholder farmers. Then the other thing is that subsidies are not about maize. They can be about beans, coffee, rice. Make it about many products. That way you're able to reach more farmers. And the ambition in the STGS is actually to provide subsidies for 1.4 million smallholder farmers. So the opportunity to scale what is currently existing is very ripe, and I think it's something that can be done in the next the next 3 months to 1 year.
All right, thank you so much for joining us. That is John Macharia,
Thank you very much.
Who is the country manager